Good evening. Welcome to KZGN-TV's Ridgecrest Talk, Thursday evening edition. I'm Robert Eierman, along with my partner Al Huey. And this evening, we have a very special guest, and we're privileged to have Mr. Wayne Lemieux. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for inviting me.
You betcha.
Glad to have you here.
Just as some background, we were talking before we went on the air. Your attorney firm, Lemieux and O'Neill, and although there has been, like you mentioned, some name changes, you've been representing the city for well over 30 years.
Yes, since the airplanes had propellers.
Okay.
Almost.
Almost.
Yeah, we came in right after Proposition 13 was adopted.
Which was the late 70s.
Late 70s, yeah.
Okay. And Al, I think you had a water question. We want to talk about water.
We've been talking about water just about every week here since the county came forward with this land management proposal that they're trying to push on us. The county supervisors vote. Well, no, I take it back. County supervisors will be here for a hearing next week.
Yes, on the 13th.
And they go back over to Bakersfield the following week and vote the 19th. The cowards. But anyway.
I think that's due to formality reasons that they're doing it that way.
One could probably say that, but I still.
Okay.
I don't know why they couldn't vote on it while they're here. So, but anyway. And we've been hearing from property owners. We've been hearing from the water district. We've heard from base representatives.
Yeah. No, I don't think we've had any on air. I don't
well,
think.
Anyway, we had, and just before this started, we had our supervisor, Mick Gleason, on with us.
Absolutely true.
He made no mention, although that's partly our fault for not looking into it because it was already in the works. But anyway, this land management plan, where they're kind of blanket rezoning thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres of land. And I was just wondering, first, have you ever heard of that large of a rezoning? And the purpose is for water conservation.
Well, if they state that's the purpose, that's probably a good thing to get that on the record, because then there's some mileposts you can measure it against. And, is that me?
No.
And to be sure, I thought I had mine turned off. To be sure, it doesn't affect anything within the city.
Correct.
So it's county territory. That
Right.
seems a little unusual. I think it is me.
Oh, it was you.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
No problem.
I thought I did that. Have I ever heard of it? No, but I've heard of other things. San Luis Obispo County, for the entire Paso Robles area, recently did a moratorium on the construction of new wells because of water
That's a
supply
lot different
concern.
than rezoning somebody's property.
It's a little more direct, yes. It is more direct.
And I was just wondering, do you think that there's a potential for litigation here when somebody's property is rezoned?
Now, that question, you can always get a yes to me, because there's 200,000 lawyers in California. I think there's more lawyers in California than there have been lawyers in the history of Japan. And maybe more lawyers in California than there have been pilots in the history of Japan. So yeah, there is a potential for litigation, but the county has broad land use powers. It's supposed to exercise them reasonably, and they're supposed to have some basis for their exercise, but they don't require much. Frankly, I think, I said earlier, I think it's a good idea they're actually admitting this is a water-driven issue, because if it turns out there's water supply is adequate, then maybe they're going to have to undo it. Mm-hmm. And it's also going to probably have consequences that aren't predicted.
Unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences are the bane of government, and I don't know why they don't know that. For example, if I had a piece of property on the edge of Ridgecrest that's just been rezoned to oblivion, I'd be walking into Ridgecrest saying, tell me what I need to do to annex and get out from under it. So now, if that's the county's goal, it's a very wise policy, is to force
I never even thought about that. So that would be, if Inyokern was annexed, then the city could rezone that.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose, but that's
I know,
that's
that's a
almost
leap.
14 miles out there.
Well, maybe not Inyokern, but anything contiguous to Ridgecrest would start drifting into Ridgecrest.
But the primary concern is the property along Brown Road, where there's a lot of ag land, both A and A1, and there's obviously also a lot of commercial agriculture out there. And the plan started out rezoning every piece of A or A1 land out there. It has been modified continuously, I guess is the best way to put it, since it came out on like about February the 1st. And they are now in a point where none of the active ag land is being rezoned. It is all being left alone. Anything smaller than 2.5 acres, 2.5 acres and smaller, that's A or A1, or is it 5?
I can't,
anyway,
it's changed so much.
I think it's 5 and smaller, now that I think about it. A or A1 is being left alone. The only property that has been zoned A or A1 is non-utilized
Undeveloped.
land, undeveloped. Nobody's put a well on, nobody's put buildings on.
What does the water district say about the adequacy of the water supply?
Wow. Depends what year you've asked them.
Yeah, we have conflicting EIRs and conflicting hydrologist papers that conflict with what the county used. They used what we call the Todd report.
Yes.
And but we're going to have to go to break here in a minute. But when we come back, we'll talk about what Robert and I have been debating for the longest time, is the constitutional aspect of these private property owners and what the county's doing to them.
Okay.
Join us when we come back. We'll be here again talking with Mr. Lemieux about water. Thank you. Welcome back to Ridgecrest Talk. We're here again with Mr. Wayne Lemieux, the attorney for the city, talking about water. Before we went to break, I said we were going to talk about the constitutional aspect of this water problem that the county has really created. But better yet, probably, is how do you determine the groundwater sustainability? And you said you knew, had some experience in
And
that.
the two are related.
Okay.
County government and city government have pretty free hand to zone, but there has to be some relationship. Since the county, with reality, since the county has announced the water supply is why they're rezoning, they get judged based on the water supply. Now the water supply for a groundwater basin is not that easy to determine. I mentioned earlier San Luis Obispo did a moratorium on new wells in the Paso Robles area. It was based on the fact that the depth to water was rapidly going down. Somebody had to stand up in the Board of Supervisors hearing room and call timeout and say, fellas, there was no lady on the board then, I don't think, we're in a drought. Groundwater goes down in a drought. It's what it's supposed to do. That's why it's there for us to use in a drought when the surface supply is inadequate. It's very hard to determine if you've got too much or too little water when it goes down in a drought. Just as it's very hard to determine if you have adequate supply if the depth of water comes up during a rainy spell. Mm-hmm. It's a complicated thing. a calculation that requires 50 years of data in the entire watershed. We've had, to give you an idea how complicated or how difficult it is, we've had 2 trials in the last 10 years, 2 basins where they had to determine whether the basin was overdrafted or not.
Okay.
The first case was in Santa Maria. The trial on overdraft involved about 8 expert witnesses and took 6 months.
Wow.
At the end of the trial, the court decided there is no overdraft here, we're going to go on to the next phase. In the Antelope Valley case, that trial, everyone agreed the basin is overdrafted. Not everyone, but virtually everyone. So they went right to the stage of deciding what the safe yield of the basin could be. Good choice, because it didn't take any longer. It took 6 months to figure out how much water could be safely pumped from the basin on a long-term basis. There was about 15 experts on that one. It's not that simple. You can't commission a report on Tuesday, get the results a month from now, and know how much water can safely be extracted from the basin, because there's room for difference of opinion.
And we've seen that in the different sides of regarding our basin. You know, I have those that, oh, it's an open basin, we got plenty of water, and the other side is it's a closed basin and we're running out of water.
Well, it's got to be researched very scientifically and very carefully, and it's the kind of a discipline where reasonably competent, good faith experts can disagree, and they just have to get in a room and talk to each other. We found in most of these cases that the experts can get a consensus. There's always an outlier or two. But if you have 10 experts, 8 of them will agree on something, and you just start moving in that direction. And it's different things. The details are what they agree on. For example, in the Antelope Valley, there was a dispute about how much water is used by native growth. That's part of the equation. It's kind of an interesting part. 80% of the experts agreed this was the X was the water duty for native plants. A couple of them said, no, it's much higher than that or much lower than that. Well, when you listen to them, you realize 80% got it right. This just wasn't a tyranny, a democratic tyranny. They got it right. They made sense. They presented their stuff. And the court looked at that and said, we'll go with the majority on this one. The court wasn't shy about willing to accept a minority opinion. It's just in that case it didn't. So these things can get sorted out, but you got to give it some time. 6 months of trial was preceded by about 2 years of study. So there's good news and bad news in that. When a sustainable groundwater management agency is formed, and earlier at a meeting I said, get going on this, it's going to take some time.
Yeah.
When it's formed, they can do this study and get the work done.
Where do they get the money for
Well,
this?
yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Where in the heck does the money come from?
For the study?
Yes.
Well, it kind of depends on how they do it. The county has spent some money, I suppose, on a study, and the Corps of Engineers does studies, the state does studies, the Water District has done studies. Everybody's done a study, and it's always been kind of a short stick study. All these agencies get together and say, all right, I'll put up 15%, you put up 25%, go around the room until we get it all. So
Okay.
it's less than they've spent already, and they're going to finally get the job done. And then we'll go to Sacramento and make a deal with the devil and get some money from them. And by the time you get done, the money's going to be there. And it's not, so much of what government spends money on is a waste. They do it, they study it, or they'll have a program, and nothing at all is accomplished. This sustainability study will actually accomplish something. You're going to know. I mean,
And you're going to have the parties that have the most skin in it. They're trying to come up with a solution.
well, yeah, it's one thing for the, let's say there's an agency whose business would be, whose policies would be furthered by a high safe yield. Well, they're going to promote that, but there's somebody else in the room who's got an equal and opposite, and so it's going to get hammered out. It's going to take some time, but when they get done, you'll get a number that's pretty accurate. And plus or minus 5–10% is probably as close as you need, and you need to know that. If the safe yield of the basin, the sustainable yield of the basin will support a population of 25,000, then you ought to keep it at 25,000 until you get some more water. If it will support 50,000, you ought to know that.
Yeah.
So you don't have to panic about the water supply. And that also can drive other things. If you know you're on the raggedy edge, maybe
We're going to have to go to break here. Sorry to cut you off, but it's a matter
Nature of the game here.
Yeah, right.
All right.
So we'll be back for our last segment in just a minute. And welcome back to our final segment of Ridgecrest Talk, Thursday evening edition. Again, I'm Robert Eierman, along with my partner Al Huey, and we're talking with a very special guest, Mr. Wayne Lemieux, the city attorney.
I don't know what you said, but you sure got me wound up there.
Well, you were talking about, you know, what is the sustainable level of water? Well, here, if you listen to the Todd report, which is what the county is basing things on, the figure is down around 7,000 acre-feet. It's barely enough to support the citizens of Ridgecrest. If we add in Cyril's Valley and the Navy, it's not enough.
And Inyukern.
And Inyukern. And if we add in all the ag done in Inyukern, we're anywhere between, according to the Todd report, 5 to 7 times our safe yield.
I'll say something. I'm going to defend David Keith Todd a little bit.
Okay.
He's a prominent hydrogeologist. He often gets things correct.
Okay.
But he has to have been commissioned to do the full study. I just don't know how in-depth that study was.
That he didn't do. He based it off of previous studies.
Yeah, so
it was only $250,000.
Why that doesn't make sense to me is I've been here long enough. If the basin has been that broadly overdrafted, there'd be no water left. There'd be massive subsidence on the surface everywhere, and the place would be a mess. It just doesn't sound right to me. But, you know, this does illustrate why you have to get the right, you need that answer. You need how much can be sustained here, because there's a price to pay for getting more water.
Most certainly.
If you have plenty of water, maybe you don't want to pay the price. If you're out of water, there's some things that come in fifth of gallon containers that you'd pay more for, but not much.
Right.
For example, if you're out of water and an industry needs to come here and it needs 5 acre-feet, they may be willing to pay the considerable cost of desalinization of brackish water in order to cover their needs.
Yes.
And the government agencies involved shouldn't be shy about asking them to do that if you're out of water.
Right.
But if you're not out of water, it's kind of an unfair demand. So that's why you gotta find the safe yield before you find it.
Well, one of the disturbing things about the county's land management plan, as we said, one of the purposes was to conserve water.
Well, halt the growth of water use. How about that?
Okay.
Halt the growth of water use. That's their land use policy?
Well, that's
reading
one of
between
their
the lines.
Yeah,
Yes.
but that's a common fever that's in the state right now.
Right. And the result, and the county has admitted this, been right here with us and said it, that this plan will do nothing to water sustainability.
The groundwater, the emergency drought regulations that were finalized and promulgated today. I couldn't look at them because they weren't on the line just
Right.
yet. Based on the premise that everyone in the state should cut back by a percentage.
Yes.
It does not take into account the fact that some areas have all the water they need and some areas don't. And some areas have the water they need because they've been wise stewards. They've bought water at the right time. They stored it. They put in projects to make sure they always have the, but everyone's being treated the same.
Yes.
Yeah.
We got to cut back by 10%. Well, that doesn't make sense.
Well, here in this area, we have to cut back by 36%.
Yeah, I have a client that's in that same position, and part of the reason for that is it's a per capita calculation.
Yes.
You have large lot sizes.
And we use water for cooling.
I'm telling you, there's a lot of defects, but that's another 24 minutes.
Yes, right.
But it kind of all fits together. If it's not wise government policy and it's not legal to simply say we're going to reduce consumption. The government can say we're going to eliminate waste, unreasonable use,
Yes.
and insist that the water only be used for beneficial uses. But they can't say, starting tomorrow, regardless of whether you're wasting the water or not, regardless of whether it's beneficial or not, you have to use less water. That's illegal.
And that's where my next question was going, because we have heard that there are attorneys sitting with at the start line just waiting to go after the Groundwater Sustainability Act that was enacted last year. You think on
No.
a scale of 1 to 10, that's 10 being that they will?
Oh, there's going to be challenges to the act, but the act will ride through. There are aspects of the act that are troubling, but a district that's properly advised will be able to get through all of that and be able to operate in a lawful manner. Some things will still have to go to court, but not much. It'll probably take 6 months to a year to shake those things out. But a well-advised sustainability district can get through the whole process and survive a court challenge.
I would have thought that they would be lining up.
Well, they're lining
challenge.
up. You asked me if they're going to be successful. They're lining
Oh,
up. They're lining up.
You just don't think that, that they have much chance against the legislation.
That's correct. This is
Okay.
something that I'm not a proponent of state and federal government
Right.
exercising power, but if they got the power, you got to admit it and fight the battle somewhere else. The state has the power.
does the state have the power through executive order, though?
There hasn't been an executive order in the drought emergency.
I thought that's what Governor Brown issued
If
was,
you read the proclamation, he didn't command anything.
okay.
He just told the state board, I command the state board to consider mandatory regulations. That's not saying there are mandatory regulations. He just said, consider them.
Okay.
And that's what they did. And if you read the drought regulations, they're not exactly mandatory.
Okay.
Some of them are, and some of them aren't. I said earlier that's 20 or 30 minutes in itself.
Right.
Yes.
But back to the sustainability agency, I think they're going to work their way through this thing and actually
hope so.
probably be helpful.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time.
Always happens.
We'll have to get you back, hopefully before another year goes by when you come to Ridgecrest, okay?
All right.
I enjoyed having you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
for
Our
taking
pleasure.
the time.
Our
I
pleasure.
always,
Thank
whenever you invite an attorney to speak.
See us next week.
Right, we got to go.
Okay.
I want-